Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today I'm going to talk to you about all the books that I read in the month of April. Every year I plan to slow down in April because in March I almost read a book a day, or 31 books, and I did complete that this year. And I did slow down quite a bit, but I did still complete 10 books. So we just have a few books to talk about. Let's dive into it. The first three I'm not actually going to talk about here because you will have already seen my vlog where I talk about my Read Like Sarah picks. In April, I spun a wheel and read like Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand, and I picked 3 books that I read like her. So I read Emily Henry's Book Lovers, Circus of Wonders by Elizabeth McNeil, and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. So if you want to know what I thought about any of these 3 books, you'll have to watch that video. But if you look at the rest of the books, they're all very monochromatic, blue, dark blue, and black. It's kind of fun. Just a little tidbit. I don't have any specific order to these. I'm just going to go from the top of the stack down. But my Patreon book club book for the month of April was Where the Forest Meets the Stars by Glendy Vandera. And I'm filming this on Sunday, and our conversation about this is later tonight at 6 p.m. And I'm very excited to talk with my patrons about this because I had a lot of feelings about it. This is one of my 5-star predictions, so I'm not going to officially tell you my rating here, but I will say that I liked this very much. In this book, we follow really Joanna, Ursa, this little girl, and Gabriel, the neighbor. Jo is living out in the woods in this cabin of one of her professors, and she's doing her PhD project where she's tracking birds and studying birds, doing research. One day, this little girl, Ursa, who's about 9 years old, shows up on her doorstep without shoes, a little bit dirty, a little bit wild looking, and claims to have come from the stars. She's incredibly smart, but Jo is determined at first to try to figure out, where did Ursa come from? Does she belong to a family nearby? Is she missing? Has somebody hurt her? On and on she's trying to figure out at the beginning, and I was trying to figure out at the beginning, but I got to a point where I decided to stop trying to figure out and just enjoy the ride. Gabe is a neighbor down the road who has a little farm and sells eggs on the side of the road, and he also gets kind of wrapped up in Jo and Ursa's stories. Ursa has said that she's from the stars and is there to witness 5 miracles, and then she'll return to the stars. I thought parts of this were very charming, parts of this were pretty mysterious, and overall I really did enjoy it, but you'll have to watch. Whenever I get around to doing my 5-star prediction wrap up, you'll have to wait for that to see my official rating. But I'm so glad I read it, and I cannot wait for the discussion, because there was one part of the storyline towards the end that I wasn't thrilled about. I don't know how much it actually deterred from the story itself, but I am very interested to talk about it with my patrons. The other Patreon related book that I read in April was Navigating Early by Claire Vanderpool. This is a middle grade, and it was my patron pick for the month. So one of my patrons chose this for me to read, and I'm so glad that I read it because I really liked it. I have read her Newbery winning book, Moon Over Manifest, and really enjoyed that as well. In this one, we follow 2 boys, Jack, whose dad is in the Navy and his mom has just passed away, and he is brought with his dad to his new post in Maine, where he starts attending a boarding school there. While there, he meets Early, who these days would probably be tested and labeled as autistic. In the 1970s, that wasn't very common. So Early was just a little bit strange. He was allowed to do things a little bit differently at the school. He was incredibly smart, and Jack and Early become really good friends throughout the course of this story. Early starts telling him this story about the number pi and the numbers that are in pi. Early sees these numbers as a story, and he starts telling Jack the story. And they end up going on this adventure, searching for Early's brother, and in the process, they just become really good friends. And the power of story to help a kid in particular process and to grow and to think about things is definitely one of Claire Vanderpool's strong points. I felt like that was a big part of Moon Over Manifest as well, the power of story. And so I really did enjoy. I didn't love the story itself. I was very much more interested in Jack and Early's story, but I understood the importance of it in this book, and I gave this one 4 stars, and I thought it was really lovely. A book that I started at the beginning of the month, right after middle grade March. I picked this up first, I believe, Woman of God by James Patterson and Maxine Petro. I started this right at the beginning and it was way too heavy and I was like, I gotta wait. So then I picked it up later in the month and did finish it, and I did really like this one. This was my spinner wheel for 12 books that I would like to read throughout the course of the year. I'm doing really good with that wheel, by the way. I've read all 4 books that I've spun so far, so yay for me. But in this one we follow Bridget, and at the beginning, we kind of are learning that the Pope, the Catholic Church, is potentially going to be naming a female Pope. And then we kind of go back in time and start about 20 years or so, and we follow Bridget, who is serving as a doctor in the Sudan, South Sudan, where things are very crazy. There's a civil war going on, and some of the rebel groups and some of the groups are just incredibly brutal. And she is serving there with about 5, I think, other doctors at this nonprofit hospital that's there. And every day they're serving hundreds and possibly thousands of people. And they're grossly understaffed and under-resourced. And it's just very, very, very dangerous. And it was such a heavy, heavy scene. Chapters, multiple chapters of this time period in her life. And it was not what I needed at the beginning of the month, but then coming back to it, I found it to be very interesting and also heartbreaking. Just to imagine that there are places like this hospital, Helping Hands or whatever it was called, that are serving in places like South Sudan and like Syria and other places where there have been such incredible turmoil. And Bridget, the story follows Bridget, and in particular her faith journey during that time. Not only what happens to her as a doctor and how she's able to help people, but also her struggle with her faith and the way that she relies on God even during that time. But then the questions she has that felt very realistic to somebody who has experienced trauma. And we follow her through this trauma into when she comes back to the States, and how does she then process all of this, and how does she move on? And she doesn't, well, it definitely lingers in her heart and her mind, as you can imagine that it would. And she struggles with relationships. She has some wonderful friendships who've just been there for her and help her through all of this and help her to process all of this. Theologically, it doesn't, like at the beginning, I was with her, I was in it. There are a few things later down the road that theologically I had issues with. But eventually, at one point, she kind of falls in love with a priest who, together, they kind of create this break-off church. It's still like Catholic, but they have changed some of the values and doctrines, if you will, of the Catholic Church. And so there's this rift between the Catholic Church and this other church, which they called Jesus, Mary, and Joseph or something like that. I forget. It's like some kind of bizarre name. I found this to be very interesting. I thought it was well written. I was very invested in Bridget and her story and her faith journey. Like I said, the theology doesn't line up with my theology at certain points, but that wasn't the point of this. They're not trying to convert anybody in this book. It just was a really good story about faith and about grief and about dealing with trauma and PTSD and how do you move on from that. And what do you hold on to? How do you hold on to hope in the midst of seeing such horrors in your life or in the lives of people around you? I just thought this was a very good book. It was a very good book. I really enjoyed it. Once I got past the fact that I was looking for something a little lighter, actually, I'll do the next book now. When I set that one down, I did pick up the Lonely Hearts Book Club. I forget who it's even by, but I'll put a picture of it here. And this was just what I needed to start April. It does deal with people who are dealing with loneliness, but we follow this young librarian, youngish. She's probably in her 20s, maybe 30s. I forget how old she is. But it encounters this old man at the library who terrifies people because he's rather cranky and incredibly smart, and he's very witty, and he can tear down people very quickly if he thinks they're stupid. And she kind of goes toe to toe with this old guy and discovers that she kind of likes it, and he thinks he kind of likes it too. So they develop this weird repartee at the library. But then a couple days go by and he hasn't been in, and she's noticed that he starts coming in when he knows she'll be there, but he doesn't show up for a couple days, and she's very worried about him. And her supervisor says not to worry about it. There's nothing you can do. Well, she doesn't think there's nothing she can do. And she uses her means to get his address, and she goes to check up on him. And she's glad that she did, because he has kind of become immobile, and she, because of his health. So she is able to come to his apartment and help out against her supervisor's wishes. And through that encounters a handful of other people, a neighbor of this old guy and his son, I believe. And together they all kind of form this really strong bond with each other. And she is able to process through some of her own issues from the past, and together with this group of people, and we get multiple perspectives throughout the book. I just found it to be, it wasn't very lighthearted and funny. There were funny moments, but I found it to be really a beautiful story of humanity and kindness and coming together and almost found family to a degree. And I just really enjoyed it. It was very heartwarming, and I liked it. The Lonely Hearts Book Club. Yay for that one. April is National Poetry Month, and I finally did finish up Muses from the Moon by W. Scott, and I decided on Goodreads not to give this a rating. I just don't think I'm the right audience for this book. I feel like most of the poems went over my head. I didn't understand them. I'm like, what is he even trying to say? I think maybe I like nature poetry a little bit more, or lighthearted poetry. I don't know. There just was something about this that didn't connect with me at all. So I didn't rate it, because how do you rate a collection of poetry? Because every page is a different poem, right? So what I did appreciate from this is that the way that the poems are set up, they're split into 3 sections, which kind of goes along with like the moon, Muses from the Moon. So the first four sections. So we have new moon, waxing crescent, waxing gibbous, and full moon. So new moon is like when there's no moon in the sky, right? There's no moon there. Waxing crescent is when it's growing into bigger. And then waxing gibbons is when it's getting even bigger. It's more than halfway full, and then full moon. And so it's kind of like stages of life and faith and hope. So it starts out a little dark and bleak. And then as the poems go on in the book, there's more life, there's more hope, there's more understanding. And I did appreciate that, but I don't think this was the poetry book for me. While my mom was here, towards the beginning of the month, she came down for her spring break, which was really nice. And she read this book that I had checked out from the library, It Needs to Be Returned. And she said it was really good, so I read it as well. I'm not sure why I even put this on hold and got it. Someone must have mentioned this. It's a Midnight Dance by Joanna Davidson Politano. It's a Christian fiction, and it's all about ballet. So we follow this one ballerina, Ella, who really has a dream of becoming a ballerina in the theater. Her mom used to be a dancer, but now her mom is pretty much a recluse. And she hides out in the theater one night and sees one of the dancers getting teased or bullied or whatever by some kids or teens out on the street, and she chucks something at them and kind of rescues this dancer, who comes in and dances with her in the back room of the theater, and then allows her to kind of watch the show from up in the rafters or something, gives her kind of a sneak peek into the actual ballet. And this changes her life. She has never danced like that with anyone before, and it was her first dance with a partner. And now she even has a stronger desire to dance on the stage and become a ballerina. But her mom is very much against theater life and does not want this life for her daughter. And there is also this kind of legend of this ballerina that the theater holds on to that is connected to her life as well. So it's really just all about ballet and this girl and the challenges that she faces as she has to decide, is she going to pursue this life of being a ballerina or not? Of course, there is there's almost like a love triangle between two of the male dancers and her. Also, there's an element of faith in this, as she has to decide if she's going to trust God with all of these challenges that she has to face. I thought it was lovely. I am not into dance or ballet at all. I don't understand any of that, but I thought it was a good story. It was a captivating story. There was a level of mystery in it, which was really fun. I did not think the faith elements were cheesy. I thought they were appropriate, and I really enjoyed it. I have a couple other Joanna Davidson Politano's books on my shelves, and I would like to read more from her because I did really enjoy this. I just am not huge into the ballet side of things, but I don't even remember why I got this. But I read it, and it was a good read. So I liked that one. And finally, at the very end of the month, today, actually, before church this morning, today's the 30th of April when I'm filming this. And just today, I finished As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Kuto. This is another one of my 5-star predictions, so I'm not going to tell you my final rating of this one, but I will say that if you ever have wondered about Syria and the Arab Spring and the rebel groups and the dictatorship that they were under for years and years, like, this gives such a good picture of what life was like for Syrians living during that time. Whew, it was heavy. There were some really difficult scenes, some difficult choices that had to be made, just so much loss and so much fear, to the point where fear is given its own character in this book, which I thought was so inventive. So it had that kind of, I don't know, supernatural element to this story. But we follow Salama, who is a very young pharmacy student, and she gets kind of roped into being a doctor at this hospital because of their lack of doctors. So she's there working as a pharmacist, but then ends up having to do more and more and more and more and becomes a doctor. And is kind of taken under the wing of one of the head doctors at the hospital. And she has a sister-in-law at home, Layla, who's pregnant, 7 months pregnant with her niece. And Salama really has to decide, is she going to stay in Syria, which she loves her country, and she feels like she's making an impact and having influence and helping people by working at the hospital, or is she going to flee and get Layla to safety to keep a promise that she made to her brother? Her brother and her father were at a protest and were picked up, arrested by the government. Her mom had passed away because of a bomb. Like, so much horror and tragedy that this young girl had to experience. Along the way, she meets a boy. He is determined to stay, which just adds another wrench into her decision-making on her own. Then this character, Fear, plays a part. He's not known as Fear. She's given him a name, who's kind of like a part of her PTSD come to life. And all of her worst fears, he allows her to see all of her worst fears and the worst case scenarios. And oh my goodness, I was weeping this morning when I finished this story. The struggle that Salama had to go through to decide what to do, and the way that all came about, and the decisions that she had to make along the way were so well done. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was beautiful. It is a YA, so there were a few things that felt a little bit YA to me, but I was very invested and I love the cover. So I'm not going to tell you my final rating, but I will say that it's worth the read for sure. So that is it. Here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus Lonely Hearts Book Club, and then the 3 that I read like Sarah. That's a pretty good reading month. 10 books in a month is not too shabby. It's slowing down a little for me. I usually am around 12 or 13 a month. So I did slow down a little bit. I am also halfway through The Way of Kings. I'm like 500 pages, which is a book on its own. 2 books potentially. So I am making good progress in Way of Kings as well, which is partly what slowed me down. But I am enjoying Way of Kings. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these if you've read them. If you are going to pick them up now or put them on your TBR, I would love to hear which ones jumped out to you. Remember to go check out my other video about reading like Sarah to find out my thoughts on these 3 books. And that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you being here. I can't wait to chat with you in the comments, and I'll talk with you in another video very soon. Bye. Holy moly, this is ridiculous.